So thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with Richard. I want to welcome you all. I also want to welcome the 22 million people who are following this on live stream. Welcome to all of you. This is great. And I also just want to give a quick thank you to two people who made my appearance here possible. My kids, Alec and Sophia. They would not let me go unless I said their name. Now I've said it. Okay, we are free to go. All right, just to get us going, and maybe just to sort of clear the air a little bit, you know, there's been some ambiguity about your position, some uncertainty, and I thought we could just sort of maybe hit it head on. Richard Dawkins, do you believe in God?
Which God? No, I don't believe in any.
Good. All right, that's out of the way. We're good. Now we can keep going. All right. All right, so we're here to talk about this book, great book that Richard just came out with, published today in the United States, An Appetite for Wonder. And a quick spoiler alert, this is actually volume 1 of a 2-volume memoir, and it kind of ends with a cliffhanger where you've just published The Selfish Gene. So the question is, why that structure, and in particular, why is The Selfish Gene, the publication of that book, a natural breaking point?
It wasn't intended to be that way. I actually signed a contract with the publishers to do the whole thing in one go. And when I got halfway through, when I got to the age of 35, I thought, I want a bit of a sense of achievement here. And so I thought, I'll stop now and I will publish it as a first volume. I was going to stop before The Selfish Gene, but then the publishers said, no, you've got to go through The Selfish Gene. That's got to be the end of the first volume. It is a natural breakpoint because before that I was a research scientist with a white lab coat, giving lectures, giving tutorials at Oxford. And afterwards, I went on doing that as well, but I then wrote a whole lot more books, did things like television, radio. My life did rather change as a result of The Selfish Gene, so it was a natural break point.
I mean, certainly that is the book where you became known to the world, right? I mean, that's certainly where I first encountered you. I was a physics student at Harvard, not doing any zoology or biology, and The Selfish Gene, a chapter was put into a reading packet for a course in philosophy that I was taking. I do hope they gave you royalties for the Xerox copies that they did. But the writing was, for me, a revelation because it was the first time, you and actually Daniel Dennett, who's also in that pack, it was the first time that real difficult science was just being spoken in plain language. So for me, it was a wonderful experience. But certainly I didn't know much about your early life until reading this book, and I suspect many are in the same boat. So I thought maybe we'd just do a quick history that you cover lyrically in the first chapters of the book. Where were you born?
Nairobi, a place of rather unfortunate association just at the moment. I lived in Kenya for only the first 2 years of my life, and then went back to Nyasaland, where my father, that was what was called then, it's now Malawi, where my father was in the British colonial service. That was his career. And so I don't remember Kenya at all, but I do remember Malawi.
And what was schooling like there?
Well, I was sent to boarding school at the age of 7 in what was then Southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. It was a remarkable school. It was a very, very English boarding school. It was a kind of export of a rather famous English boarding school called the Dragon School. The Dragon School is in Oxford, and it's a very fine school. And a master from the Dragon School called Tank, that was his nickname. I thought the nickname referred to the sort of tank you have in your roof, but it obviously in fact meant the kind of military vehicle that won't stop for anything. That must have been how he got his nickname. He went out to Africa to seek his fortune and started a kind of son of dragon school called Eagle School. And they had the same kind of traditions. They had a very adventurous spirit. They had the tradition of calling the teachers by their nicknames. And it's the only school I've heard of where, apart from the Dragon School, where this is encouraged. You even called the headmaster Tank when he was beating you, which, you say, sorry, Tank, you'd say.
And is there something about that experience that you look to now, or that you would say have your fans, your readers know, that was really highly impressionable on who you became? I mean, is that a vital part when you look back?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, it was so English, although it was in Africa.
Yeah.
It was a very, very English school, and we played cricket, and it was just like being in an English school, really. Home life was a little bit more exotic, and home life was, I keep getting this, but I turned to Brian, I suddenly hit the microphone, sorry about that.
Sort of like the voice of God when you turn
exactly.
there, yeah.
Home life in Africa was a rather spoiled, privileged one. I mean, it was like Edwardian England. We had servants, and there was a cook, and people served at table, and there was a gardener and everything. In other respects, it wasn't very luxurious. There were no water closets or anything like that, no piped water. You had, baths had to be filled with water heated on the stove kind of thing. But there was servants to do it for you.
Which is always nice, yes. Now, there's one theme that struck me running through the early sections, the early chapters of the book, where you were looking back on, say, young Richard Dawkins, as kind of, I don't know, naive and gullible in some way. And you told a couple of stories. One, you're playing hide and go seek, and the person you're playing with said that they were invisible, and that's why you couldn't find them. And now you look back and you're like, how could I have believed that? You also told a story, a charming little story about lightning and thunderstorms. And what was that one?
Our house was struck by lightning.
This one where you were lying in bed. I hope this came from your book. I'm going to be really embarrassed if it was another book. But you were lying in bed, and someone told you that if you get hit by lightning...
Oh, yeah, okay, right, got it, yeah. Yes, I was gullible. There was, in the dormitory, actually in my English school, when we'd moved back to England, there was a sort of nighttime storyteller who would hold us spellbound with his horror stories. And he told us, for example, that there was a kind of insect which would leap sideways from the wall onto your temple, dig a hole in your temple, and bury a bag of poison in there. He also told us that when you were struck by lightning, you would know nothing about it for 15 minutes. And only after 15 minutes would blood start trickling out of both your ears. And we all believed this, and when there was a big thunderstorm, we were all waiting in terror, timing 15 minutes. So I wasn't always the skeptic.
So you look back now, and you say in the book how it's like vital to teach kids, critical thinking, so they wouldn't believe stories, fantasies like that. Not everyone would agree with that, and I know you've gotten some conversation about. I mean, if you have a bunch of kids that are playing, and Timmy and Jimmy have these ships going near a black hole and rushing all over, and you got little Poindexter in the corner saying, "You can't do that. You can't go faster than the speed of light." It's like whose brain is really firing on all cylinders, and more importantly, who would you rather play with?
Yes, I agree. No, I think that playing games like that and playing spaceships I played spaceships with my friend Jill Jackson, and our beds were spaceships, and we would make up the fantasy as we went along, and she would say, Captain, the Troons are attacking on the starboard side," and I would sort of, steer the spaceship away and so on. I think that sort of fantasy is wonderful. I think I probably draw the line at magic, supernatural magic, where frogs turn into princes and things like that, because that does, I think, possibly teach a wrong attitude to I mean, reality is so wonderful without supernatural magic, and I think I would have benefited from being a bit more skeptical. Partly, you told the story of when I was fooled by this chap who said he was invisible. And I mean, I was playing hide and seek with him. He was a nice African man, playing hide and seek with him, and I looked in a particular hut, and he wasn't there. And then I came back later and looked in the same hut, and he was there. And he told me that he'd been there all along, but had made himself invisible. And I found that a more plausible explanation than that he had simply been lying. Well, I think it would be good if children were a bit more skeptical than that.
But can I ask you one question that, maybe it's more just for my own personal use, because, I'm Jewish, my wife is Catholic. What do you do about Santa Claus? Like, where does that fit in?
It's a bit of a mystery, because all children believe in Santa Claus, and then they learn that it's not true. But for some reason, they don't then generalize the principle. My parents have lied to me about this. I don't mind. I mean, I don't want to be a killjoy. I don't want to be a Scrooge about this. But instead of telling a child there is no Santa Claus, what about saying something like, well, let's just work this out. How many chimneys are there in the world?
But here's the problem. Yeah. I tried that approach, and my wife got furious at me, right? Spoiling, this wonder of Santa Claus. So I went out and I got like this 99-cent app that showed Santa going around the earth, in a very fast spaceship, and I could show the kids to reconvince them that Santa Claus was real. But putting that to the side, the curious thing that has happened, and I think this is really the question that I have, it has provided an opportunity, an unexpected opportunity for that kind of critical thought, because we celebrate both Hanukkah and Christmas. These presents come in December. Now, the Christmas presents, they come from the North Pole delivered by Santa. The Jewish, the Hanukkah presents, they come from Amazon delivered by FedEx, So what my kids do is, ultimately the presents all get in one big heap 6 months later, something breaks, and I'm like, oh, don't worry about it, we got it from Amazon, we can just order another. They're like, you got that at Amazon? You told us it's Santa. Right? Yes, that was one of the Santa ones. So really, my son in particular has now gone through a very dedicated analysis, critical thinking, where on his own he's coming to this conclusion. It seems better to allow someone to go through that process of having some idea that really doesn't hold water and let them find the leaks.
There's a lot in that, and I think that's right. I can remember believing that if you prayed for something hard enough, you'd get it. And I tried it.
Well, that's true, right?
I tried it experimentally, and it didn't work.
But would you say that your own life, looking back now, again, I'm not trying to be an armchair psychologist. Looking back, through the book, it strikes me that part of your passionate devotion to making sure that people don't hold these false ideas, does it come from looking back at young Richard and having that sense of aghast? How could he have believed that?
No, I don't think so.
I'm not a good psychologist.
No, but I do think that you and I both know that reality has a better magic anyway.
Yes.
And somehow it's demeaning to feed a child with the magic of spells of frogs turning into princes and sleeping beauties and things where, or werewolves or ghosts and things like that, because reality is so much more wonderful and so much more magical. And I think it gets in the way, but I get kicked around the room whenever I say this, spoiling the magic of childhood. I want to put a better magic into childhood.
Right. I guess the question is, there's a judgment call, I guess, as to when a young mind is sort of ready to really appreciate that kind of wonder. and when the other kind of magic is preparing them in some way for it.
Well, it may be preparing them, but it may also be preparing them in a false direction. I mean, I was devoted to Dr. Dolittle. Do you have Dr. Dolittle in this country?
Yes.
Yeah. And who could talk to animals, and all the plots depend upon his ability to talk to animals. I desperately wanted to be Dr. Dolittle, and I thought that if I believed it hard enough, I would be able to talk to animals, and I would be able to. I go one better than Dr. Dolittle. I would do it by telepathy, and I attempted to telepathically attract all the animals to come to where I lived, well, I don't think a child should have been brought up in such a way as to believe that just willpower can achieve something when it can't.
Right. Now, you then moved back from Africa to England. How old were you when that?
8.
8. And what drew your family back?
Well, my father thought that his career would be in the British Colonial Service, but unexpectedly he was left in the will of an extremely distant cousin. I suppose you could call it the family estate. It was rather a reduced estate by the time 1946 came when he got it. It had been in the Dawkins family. It's an English estate since 1723, when Henry Dawkins bought it. And in 1946 it was owned by Major Hereward Dawkins, who was childless and had no closer relations. And so he left it very unexpectedly to my father, I don't think he'd ever heard of Hereward Dawkins. And suddenly this telegram arrived saying that he'd been left a farm in England. And even then he thought his career would go on being in Africa, but then the tenant on the English estate unexpectedly died, and then my parents then were faced with a decision whether to find a new tenant or whether to forsake their life in Africa and take up an entirely new life in England. And my father retrained as an English farmer and gave up his colonial pension, gave up his whole career, and we moved to England.
How was that transition for you?
Well, I was sorry to leave school and start a completely new school. It was a rather similar kind of school, actually, in England. It was much colder in England, of course, wetter. So I missed Africa in many ways.
Right. Now you go through, a quite compelling description, which I won't be able to do justice to in the short time that we have of your school years, but then it came time to apply to university, and Oxford was one place that seemed like a natural place to try to go. You had a long family history.
Yes, this was family history, and my father and grandfather were both adamant that I should go to Balliol College, Oxford, where I think 11 members of the Dawkins family had been. And it was unthinkable to them that I wouldn't get in, but the school didn't think I would get in. They thought I wasn't up to it, and I probably wasn't up to it, actually. I was coached for it by a very, very conscientious schoolteacher, Johan Thomas, who, although he thought I didn't have a chance...
That's like Stanley Kaplan here, if you need a translation.
Although he thought I didn't have a chance, he had me at his house for week after week in the evenings, coaching me, and he got me in. Thank goodness. I mean that was, if anything, was the making of me. That Oxford was.
Now you initially had your sights set on biochemistry, and you described in the book. If I just give one sentence, because I found it particularly, you noted that the tutor who interviewed me, the kindly Sandy Ogston, who later became Master of Trinity, declined, thank goodness, to let me in as a biochemist, perhaps because he was one himself and would have had to teach me, but offered me a place to read zoology instead.
Yes.
So what was it about the young applicant Dawkins that made you unsuited to biochemistry, but he saw zoology as a natural place?
Well, maybe he just didn't want to teach me, but I later recognized that zoology was perfect for me because the system at Oxford is you have to write an essay every week, and you're sent into the library, and you're given no textbooks. You're given reading list of original research literature, and you have to go and follow references at the back. You have to be a real scholar. And I loved that. I really flourished in that atmosphere. It took me a while to get the hang of it, but I really flourished. And zoology was perfect for that, because the sort of subjects we got asked to write about for our essays were controversial subjects, where you had to weigh up contrary points of view, weigh up evidence on both sides, come to your own conclusion. I don't think that would have been true in biochemistry. I suspect in biochemistry it would have been a lot more learning of lots and lots of facts. I could be doing the subject an injustice, but certainly in zoology we would be given subjects like is evolution progressive? Controversial, difficult, opinions on both sides, read the literature, become a sort of world authority on the subject. Because
and with those tutorials, were you challenged in those? Did you read out your essay? I mean,
yes, you read it out aloud, and yes, you could be challenged. The practice of reading aloud has rather dropped now. It's now the tutor is expected to read it ahead of time, which means the tutor's even more conscientious. My Uncle Bill, who appears in the book, a generation earlier, was also at Balliol College, and he was rather good at rugby and cricket and things, and he wasn't quite so conscientious at writing his essays. And on one occasion, he, I'm sorry to say, copied his essay out of a book. I'm sure he didn't always do that, but anyway, he was reading his essay out, and the tutor silently rose from his chair, went over to the bookshelf, selected a book, and then began following with his finger. And my poor uncle was forced to simply go on reading his essay right through to the end, whereupon the tutor snapped the book shut and said, "I see you agree with Mr. So-and-so."
So you went through the undergraduate years there, and you stayed at Oxford for graduate
Yes.
work as well.
I stayed to be, I joined the research group of Nico Tinbergen, who's a very famous scholar of animal behavior. He later won the Nobel Prize. And he had a flourishing research group with a wonderful atmosphere. I became a graduate student among other graduate students. It was one of the happiest times of my life. We had Friday evening seminars, which stayed with me forever. They lasted 2 hours, but you didn't notice. The time flashed by, and the reason the time flashed by was that we didn't just listen to somebody giving a talk and then have questions. The whole time was interruption, argument, discussion. Nico himself encouraged that. He almost wouldn't let the speaker get the first sentence out before he would interrupt. Yeah, but what do you mean by? And then we would be off. And that was a formative educational experience for me.
Can I tell you one thing that was interesting when I read it, perhaps even a little surprising? You describe how the gold standard from your perspective, and correct me if I'm reading too much into it, was to not just do qualitative analysis in zoology, but to find quantitative results, to find a mathematical formula, which you describe one example of, where you can actually describe the behavior of these pecking chicks mathematically with precision. And that is my language, right?
Yeah,
you know,
right.
when I hear something like that, you know, at first I wonder, is there a little, PE in here? Physics envy, is what we call this, because that's, after all,
that's right.
what is our lifeblood.
Exactly. Yes. I'm glad you picked that out. I mean, it was my ambition to do that. It was, if you want to know what's going on inside the head of an animal, the neurobiological way, the physiological way, is to cut the skull open and look, or stick electrodes in, and that's bloody, and I didn't like that. An alternative way, which appealed to me, is to, it's really Popperian philosophy of science, where you dream up a model, sort of imagine a model, a theory, a hypothesis of what might be going on inside the animal's head. deduce with algebra predictions from that model, and then test the predictions with as much data as you can in order to get rid of the statistical noise and get accurate predictions. And I really wanted the predictions to be quantitatively precise, as you say, because in a sense, any fool can predict that a quantity X will be larger than a quantity Y, but how much larger? X should be actually a particular mathematical function of Y. And the more data you gather, the more data you pile in, the closer it should approximate to this exact prediction. And that's what I found. I couldn't claim that the conclusion I drew about what was going on inside my little birds' heads was of any great interest. For me, it was rather more to demonstrate the method that you can do that sort of science without actually opening the animal up.
But what would make me nervous as a physicist in that situation is I look at the physical system and it's so complex, right? I mean, the reason why I do physics is because we study, electrons, individual particles that have such a simplicity in context, such a paucity of distinct variables that we think that our mathematics might actually be describing what's going on.
Yeah.
I'd be so damn nervous in your situation to try to think mathematically about the situation.
Yeah.
Does that play into it too?
Rightly so, I think. I think that's right. Biology is so complicated. Biology is a mess in a way, compared to physics, where at different levels you're studying balls. I mean,
yes.
Really?
That's right. He calls it as he sees them. He does.
Either little quantum, atoms, or Newton's balls, or billiard balls, and so the mathematics that you do is incredibly precise. I think Richard Feynman once said that the predictions of quantum theory, some of them at least, are out to so many significant figures that it's equivalent to predicting the width of North America to the width of one human hair.
Yeah.
Well, that's physics. Now, biology doesn't even begin to approach that level of precision.
Do you think it will?
No, I don't. I doubt it. No. But on the other hand, the conclusions we try to draw, we can already draw without. We know, there are certain things in biology we know are true, and we don't have to worry about further. We know that evolution is true. For example, is definitely true. Nothing's going to change that. Details will change, but.
Right. So that was your graduate work. You went off to Berkeley,
I went off to Berkeley as a very, very junior assistant professor, and spent 2 years there teaching animal behavior and taking part in riots and demonstrations and things like that.
And then you came back to Oxford.
Came back to Oxford in 1970 as a lecturer and fellow of New College, Oxford.
In 1973, 3 years after you got back, there was a fateful strike.
Yes.
Right?
In the early 70s, there was a bad, almost general strike in Britain, which led to what was called the 3-day week, and there were power cuts, and it was impossible to get on with lab research. So I got out my lecture notes on animal behavior and started to turn portions of them into a book, which eventually became The Selfish Gene. And I only actually wrote 1 or 2 chapters of it and before the strike came to an end, unfortunately from one point of view. And so I went back to my research and put the first 2 chapters of The Selfish Gene in a drawer and didn't return to them until 2 or 3 years later.
Right, but ultimately you did. You wrote The Selfish Gene.
Yes, and in a way that was a good lull, because in the intervening years there were very significant advances in evolutionary theory, which I was able to incorporate.
Now, were you worried? When I wrote my first book, I waited till I had tenure. And, people started to say, you're going to get the whole Carl Sagan effect of people sniping at you in the community. It didn't happen to my face. I mean, who the heck knows what happens behind your back? But was that a concern? Because you were, many decades ahead.
Well, I don't know. I think the Carl Sagan effect has died away, actually.
Now,
yes.
but you're talking 76, right?
That's true, yes. No, it didn't worry me.
Right.
Possibly should have done, but no, I don't think so. I don't think I've suffered from that, actually.
Right. So, of course, from there, you've gone on to write a variety of other books expounding the various ideas of evolution, and you've, of course, as we all famously know, moved into the position as one of the strong proponents of atheism. I made a joke about it early, but if you don't mind, can we spend a few minutes talking about God, if that's okay? So I'm just wondering, I too get asked at many lectures my view on God. And my typical answer is that, sure, there could be a God that's behind it all, and what we're doing as physicists, chemists, biologists, working out God's laws. And if that's how it is, I am thrilled to be part of that noble journey. I then add by saying, look, there's no evidence for that. I don't see any reason to believe that. And if what we're doing is just working out the laws of physics or chemistry or biology, and that's all that you need for a universe, I'm thrilled to be part of that journey. So the bottom line is, from a sociological, from a historical viewpoint, religion's very, very interesting, but it's kind of profoundly uninteresting to answer the deep questions, because I feel like all I'm doing is replacing one mysterious set of words framed scientifically with another set of equally mysterious words that are framed non-scientifically. Yeah. Now, I should say, after I say that, I always apologize, because I am all for hedging your bets. I'm not beyond that at all. What do you think of that view?
Well, I think that the sort of Newtonian, Newton thought that he was working out God's laws, and he was demonstrating the glory of God's mind when he worked out the laws of mechanics and so on. I'm not so at ease with that as you seem to be, because it does seem to me that if there is a supernatural, superhuman intelligence that worked it all out, in a way that undermines the entire scientific enterprise, because we are, maybe an evolutionary biologist feels this more strongly, the whole enterprise of evolutionary biology is to explain how you get prodigious complexity and design from virtually nothing. I mean, we hand over to physicists when we can go beyond the virtually nothing to the absolutely nothing. But if you start from quite an advanced level, bacteria, and work up to mammals and humans, we have a working theory which we know is true, which explains how you can go from great simplicity to prodigious complexity, and finally to the sort of complexity which is capable of designing things, of creating things, of working out how to do things. Well, if you are suddenly going to insert a designing machine, a creator, an intelligence at the root of the universe, you've just undermined your entire enterprise, because your entire enterprise has been to explain how you get to something complicated enough to do design.
But even if that being just set in place the laws and then stood back?
Even that, even the deistic God who sets the laws in place and withdraws, if the implication is that those laws were cunningly designed, cunningly crafted, as many people think they were, so that atoms should come into existence, so that chemistry should come into existence, so that stars should come into existence, so that nuclear reactions in stars could produce the elements, so that they'd explode and we'd get a suitable chemistry to make life, and then the origin of life and so on. If the deistic God thought all that through and set up the laws of physics, then he would have to be damn clever. he would have to be the physicist to end all physicists. I don't care if he then withdraws. He needs an explanation in his own right. And it seems to me that the noble scientific enterprise is to start from as near nothing as you can get.
Yeah.
And
See, the funny thing is, I agree with everything that you say, but I have no issue. And I've never heard it from you, but some of your group has gotten kind of mad at me, calling me an accommodationist. You know, I have sort of no problem with that really smart God physics guy behind it all.
I don't understand why not. I really don't.
You know?
Why doesn't that undermine the whole scientific enterprise?
Because, again, I don't think it's true, but if it turned out to be true, I would feel like, hey, there's this fantastic puzzle that we worked out from this point forward, and yeah, that being set it all up in motion, but it was a great journey to figure out the puzzle.
Oh yeah, that for sure.
know.
But aren't you dissatisfied because you haven't explained? You've explained precisely nothing because it was all there in.
Well, I guess I would say it's sort of like if you're given one of those brain puzzlers in a book. Some smart author has worked out the brain puzzler, but damn, I still enjoy figuring it all out.
No,
and it feels very satisfying, and I feel like I got somewhere.
Yeah.
You know. Now, I feel funny saying this because I don't believe what I'm saying is true. But I'm talking more, of course, as a point of
I know you don't
principle.
believe it, but you shouldn't even be satisfied by it. I mean,
I still do. I still feel satisfied.
no, puzzle solving.
Yeah.
Puzzle solving's great. I mean,
Yeah.
you can enjoy solving a crossword puzzle, although you know that a human mind set it.
Yeah.
But you want to know what gave rise to that mind that set the crossword, and we know that.
I agree. You know, if you can go further back, the further back you can go, the happier I am. Maybe that's a way of saying it. And I'd be like pretty damn happy to go from you know, a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a second after the beginning till today. And if we could fill in that other piece and didn't have to mention creator, I'd be pretty happy too. But it's not as though if we had to, all of a sudden I feel like the whole enterprise was a waste of time.
No, you wouldn't feel that.
You know. So I guess that's sort of what I'm saying.
But maybe it's because biologists are so. I mean, it's our business to explain where brains that are capable of designing come from.
But you don't have to even go anywhere near as far back as I do. So in some sense, you'd put the wall much further ahead in time.
That's true. That's
so
true.
if I'm satisfied, by God, you should be satisfied.
No, that's not true. Not true. Not true.
Let me just change it slightly.
Okay, all right.
And a more pragmatic, even strategic question. So, you know, there are times that people challenge physics. You know, that Einstein's false, Newton's, you know, all this sort of stuff. And typically I don't engage with them because I've never found it satisfying, never found it fruitful. You, on the other hand, do engage with people who really go after evolution as saying it's just not true. And I was watching an interesting video, and again, if any of this you don't want to talk about, push us along. But there was a video with this woman, Wendy Wright. I found it very interesting to watch because I saw you making all the good arguments. But a good argument will never make headway if the participants don't agree to certain basic rules of engagement.
Yeah.
And I just, at some point, I was wondering if it was fighting a just losing battle. And so did you find that satisfying, that conversation with her?
Of course not, no. But in a way, I mean, she was purporting to be playing by the same rules because what she kept saying was, show me the evidence, show me the evidence.
But you must have known that going in,
well,
right?
But I mean, I kept saying, okay, let's go to the museum. I will show you the evidence.
Yes. But you see, but you're assuming that if you laid out a logical argument, she would be convinced.
No, well, okay.
But that is clearly...
No, clearly not. Well, in her case, I would not have aspired to change her mind. But this was a television program we were making. I was interviewing her for television. And so I didn't really have my eye on changing her mind. I had my eye on the 2 million
viewers.
people who were going to be watching the television
And
program.
what does the data show? That was the other question I have. Has this approach really been effective?
I don't know. I suspect so. I think that my guess is that there are a very large number of people who are sitting on the fence,
Yeah.
or perhaps hardly even realize there was a fence to sit on, and who will see something like my interview with Wendy Wright and will be swayed to think this is actually quite an interesting subject, and I will indeed go and look at the evidence. So I'm hoping that's
And
true.
is that better than, again, my approach has always been sort of, and it's yours too, really, to show people the wonder of science
Yeah.
and get them excited about the power of scientific explanation rather than trying to say this other stuff makes no sense, don't touch it, but just show them the wonder of this. It goes back to Santa Claus, really. You know, do you want somebody to discover the power of the scientific approach, or do you want to tell them that this other approach doesn't work?
Yeah, there's a lot in that, and I think we probably need to do it both ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I go to a related question? I'll take some of the questions from the audience. An allied question that I have, which is, how do you feel about a human being holding irrational or contradictory beliefs at the same time? So let me give you a concrete example.
Okay.
So my father died 27 years ago. I know he's dead. I still talk to him on a regular basis.
Yeah.
There are cases when I'll ask him to do things. As a physicist, I know that makes no sense. As a human being, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
So I guess when you hear that, do you say, man, you're an idiot?
No,
or like,
no,
you know,
no. No, I think that's quite normal, and I
do
think
you do
that's
it?
a human.
I mean, do you find yourself doing it?
No, but I wouldn't be terribly. I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, it wouldn't shock me.
If a plane was going down, you're on it. Do you pray to God?
No, I wouldn't.
Would you even invoke God even for a moment?
I might use the word God.
What would you mean by which God? Which God would you mean?
Yeah, I certainly do. I mean, it's part of the language.
Yes.
It's not. Yeah. There are times when one says, "Oh my God," you know, "Oh God."
Quick related subject. A question I've always had is, do you think that there are fundamental limits to intelligence? So, you know, we hear this data, and again, tell me if my facts and figures are wrong, that we share, say, 98% of our DNA with our close cousins, say, chimps. So that 2% difference is supposedly responsible for the differences between us. A question I have is that the right way of looking at it, or is the vast majority of the DNA doing sort of under the radar processes, and the real part that we should be looking at, we differ by 50% or 80% on that?
Oh, I think that's right. Yes, all mammals actually share the great majority of their genes, and the way to think of it is, you know that a computer like a Mac or a PC has a lot of toolbox routines which are under the hood, and they're doing things like doing the pull down menus and the shifting the windows and all that sort of stuff. That's why all Mac programs look alike, because they're all calling the same toolbox routines. And the difference between one program and another, like the difference between Microsoft Word and Mac Paint or something, is just the order in which those toolbox routines are called. And so there's a sort of higher order genes which are calling the lower order genes, like the toolbox routines. And the difference between a human and a mouse, not that many genes different, but the ones, it's the order in which they're called. But you started by saying limits to human intelligence, and the thing that impresses me is that we are we are African apes, and we are adapted to hunt and gather on the African savanna. And you wouldn't think that in order to do that, you would need to be able to compose a symphony or write a poem or do physics.
In fact, those who did physics probably got eten, right?
Yeah.
They should have been looking out there.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So there is, there seems to be an enormous capacity for emergence in the human brain when you add culture, when you add the remarkably fast process of cultural evolution with no effective genetic change at all, and what we can do, even if you just go to, what Archimedes did, and then go on to what Newton did, and then go on to what Einstein did, and go on to what modern quantum theorists do. It's so far beyond anything that our wild ancestors were ever called upon to do.
But why can we do it? If it's not selected for in a very basic way, why is it there?
Well, think of this analogy. A computer, it's called a computer because it's a calculator. I mean, it does arithmetic.
Are you saying this is like a side benefit?
Yeah. I mean, once you've got the principle of a programmable computer, which originally was built to do mathematics, you suddenly find it can play chess, it can word process, it can do your accounts, it can simulate Vancouver. It doesn't require much additional effort. Once you've got this idea of a programmable, versatile machine, you can make a computer absolutely become another kind of machine.
Right.
It can simulate anything, and I think you call that an emergent property, and I think that the human brain accidentally, as a byproduct, because of something about what was necessary in order to survive in the African plains or something, gave us brains which were capable of showing these emergent properties. And who knows what the limits are? I mean, who would ever have predicted that you could get a genius like Einstein?
Right.
And so what next?
Right, but the flip side, of course, is there are other intelligent animals walking around the earth who can't understand certain deep truths that we found, right? I mean, dogs don't understand general relativity. Every time I say that, I think the dogs are out there, he thinks we don't understand general relativity. But sort of putting that to the side, one presumably thinks that we're in the same boat, that the deep truths may be right here for the taking, but like the dog, we just don't have the gray matter to figure it out.
I think that's perfectly possible. There's a lovely, not lovely, rather nasty actually, science fiction story, but Fred Hoyle's The Black Cloud.
We don't know that one.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's a superhuman intelligence which we humans get in touch with, and at the end of the book, the humans start to converse with it about the deep problems. They call them the deep problems, and you've just used the phrase. And the superhuman intelligence, which is a great big cloud, offers to teach them the deep problems, and they die. Their brain just overheats. It can't.
Smoke comes out. And that's
right.
it.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. So it could be like that.
Right.
But on the other hand,
it could be dangerous to
it
think
can
about
be dangerous. But on the other hand, we've progressed so far towards the deep problems since our Pleistocene ancestors that it would be a bold person who would predict that we can't go on.
Are you surprised? I mean, we all talk about the great variation of life on Earth, and you see these wonderful pictures of deep sea. I mean, it's really rich. But at another level, I'm really wondering, are you surprised at the limited range of life on Earth? I mean, when you think about the number of sort of distinct senses that different living organisms have, you can count them on probably two hands, right?
Yes. The senses. As a physicist, you ought to accompany that by saying, well, why don't we have such and such a sense?
Yes.
And I'm not sure you'll be able to do that. I would have thought, actually, we probably do have senses to do most of the things that physics allows us to do. We don't have radio.
Other ranges of the spectrum. I guess you could say that we live in a world where the sun's rays are in a certain wavelength, and therefore those are the ones that are most useful for us to have.
But we have Well, when echolocation was discovered, bat sonar,
yeah.
Humans had discovered sonar for military purposes before Donald Griffin discovered that bats do it. And Griffin has a story that his colleague who worked with him on it, Greene, was reporting on the bat sonar at a conference of, I think, engineers. And one of them was so furious, he actually seized Greene and shook him because he couldn't believe that bats had got there millions of years before humans. But so echolocation, electrolocation in fish is another sense which we're not not aware of, and but which physicists could have predicted. I think that if you sat down as a physicist and said there ought to be an animal that uses such and such a medium, yeah.
So if we find life elsewhere in the universe, you imagine that their senses are going to be pretty similar to ours?
I have speculated about this. I think, provided their world has, it's obviously going to have a star with light. So there will be light. Light provides an obvious way to make sense organs because photons travel in dead straight lines. They're reflected in a beautifully geometric way. So I would expect there to be eyes. There are 9 different principles of eyes in the animal kingdom.
Principle of eye meaning
ways
in which they see.
Ways of doing optics.
I see,
yes, okay. And all 9 of them. I don't think we know of any other kinds. And for example, we and many other animals have a camera eye with a lens which focuses an inverted image. Compound eyes are a great big sphere or hemisphere of lots of tubes pointing in different directions. And so insofar as there's an image at all, it's not an inverted image, it's the right way up. Because if a dragonfly sees a moving target in that tube, then it's got to be up there. If it sees it in that tube, it's got to be down there. That's a much cruder form of vision. It is a different principle.
Right.
The parabolic reflector principle we know about as physicists is used in reflecting telescopes, and that's used in certain mollusks. And there are other principles that are used. So I would think that if we find life on other planets, I'd stick my neck out and say, yes, they'll have eyes.
Before I go to audience questions that I have here, I have one other quick subject that I'm just wondering what you think about. You know, there's this interesting argument by your colleague at Oxford, Nick Bostrom. Do you know Nick? He's in the philosophy department.
Oh, go on, yes. Okay.
Yeah, and you know, I wrote a little bit about this, so I got some feedback from people, which was a little bit surprising. And he argues that the notion of a simulated universe, that, you know, the Matrix, if you will. Imagine one day we have these powerful supercomputers, and we really, with fantastic fidelity, can create a universe in silico, if you will, which has sentient beings within it that don't know that they are in a simulation. And he goes through an interesting argument with, just for brevity of time, let me just simplify it. He may be a little irritated with the simplification, but it gets to the main point, which is, it's so, in principle, easy, once you have that technology, to create a simulated universe, that there'd be many more simulated universes than real universes. Real universes are hard to create. Maybe there's one, maybe there's a few, but it's hard to imagine that you could create them in as great abundance as you could create universes in a computer. You come home at night, you flick it on, you create a universe, and you sort of kick back and you watch what happens. So he argues that it's therefore much more likely, just based on the statistics, that we are in a simulated universe than that we're not in a simulated universe. So I wrote about this in a book that spoke about various ways in which you can imagine other universes. So the surprise for me was people came back and said to me, and then Nick, I read later, people said to him too, this for them was the most convincing argument for a creator. Because now the creator was not some mysterious being. It was some futuristic teenage kid with pimples in his garage who just created the universe. So, my question to you, what do you think about that?
I can't see how you could refute it. I mean, I can't see how you would actually be sure that we're not
If a religion were to rise up, where people were honoring the teenage kid, would you go around and say, I get it, you can't refute it, and I'm kind of okay with it?
I wouldn't worship him.
No, I agree with that. That I could have guessed from the outset. But in that situation, where it's less like fairies, it's less like, ghosts, it's less of this crazy ideas.
Yes.
There's actually a logical sequence of words that can be given, meaning where there is a creator to this world. What do you say then?
Yeah, I agree. I'm intrigued by the thought that when you make a simulated world, and there are crude ones like Second Life.
Yes.
There has to be a physics built into it.
Yes.
And when you drop things, they fall, and when you throw them up and catch them, it works. But you can violate that physics. I mean, the pimply youth doing the simulation can somehow just at will change the physics, and you could suddenly fly, as you can in Second Life. It's got to be a pretty disciplined pimply youth that sees to it.
As a creator of this world should be, I would say.
Yes, but that we don't see that. Well, I suppose we don't. I mean, maybe.
Well, maybe he wipes our memory clean after playing around with us, right? All these things are possible.
Yes.
Anyway, let me just end my questioning with this one, which is, along those lines, what would it take to convince you that there is a God? Is that even possible? I mean, I've asked this question myself. The clouds open up and some of the, Brian, I'm here, I am real.
Yeah.
I'd probably check myself into Bellevue, right? I wouldn't take that as evidence.
I would too.
What about you?
No, I mean, for a long time, I've gone around saying, of course, if a great big Paul Robeson voice suddenly said, but I agree. I mean, just like the man playing hide and seek with me, I think it far more plausible that I was hallucinating, or that there was some kind of conjuring trick. So I think it's very hard to imagine what it would even mean to demonstrate something supernatural. If something appeared to be supernatural, my reaction would be, well, then we don't know enough about what's natural.
Right.
We need to do better science in order to explain it.
Right, but the pimply kid is an interesting case because
that would really screw things
he opens up and there's nothing supernatural.
That's
It's
right.
just just kind of strange. Okay, anyway, some of your questions. I think we have we have a little bit of time. All right. Any guess on when the president won't be obligated to end major speeches with "and God bless the United States of America"?
I suspect that President Obama is an atheist. The interesting question, and I wouldn't be surprised if Presidents Clinton and Kennedy were as well. It wouldn't, but the interesting question then is, when will they dare to say so? When will a president dare to say so? And my suspicion is that there may be a certain amount of emperor's new clothes going on here, and it's widely believed that you cannot get elected in the United States unless you say, "In God we trust," whatever it is, of "God bless America." Maybe it's just not true. I mean, maybe nobody's tried it. Maybe we should all be, not we, I can't speak for you, maybe you should all be writing to your congressman saying, you don't just have to suck up to the Catholic lobby and this lobby and that lobby and so on. What about the atheist lobby? We exist. We're actually quite numerous. So don't take us for granted. And maybe that'll come soon. Maybe there'll be a tipping point.
Maybe somebody will blink.
Yeah.
I've noticed there's a certain niche group of people who follow your work in order to spread your ideas to the general public of looking at things logically. How do you inspire those who are ignorant?
Well, we covered that a bit with Wendy Wright, didn't we?
Yeah.
I think yeah, okay.
For both of you, how do you think humanity will escape what Carl Sagan called our technological adolescence? what would convince you that we're finally growing up as a species?
I'm not sure where he said that. Do you remember where he said that?
I don't, actually. I don't know if the questioner can fill us in or if it matters. But
Adolescence.
In Contact, the novel.
Okay, yes. I mean, that's a possibility that nuclear proliferation. I mean, it's been speculated that there may be a rather brief window in any planetary life form between reaching the sort of advanced technological level where we might get in touch with them. But this is attempting to explain why we haven't actually received any signals from extraterrestrials. It may be that the window between the moment when they reach the technological threshold of being able to send radio signals that far and then wiping themselves out is a brief little blink. So all over the universe there may be little kind of winkings of intelligent life coming into existence and almost immediately, by geological standards, wiping themselves out.
Could it also be, I mean, we spoke a little bit about this, but the question leads me to ask it further. You know, I suspect you think that life in the universe is possible or maybe
Yes.
even likely.
Yeah.
But it's less obvious whether intelligent life is ubiquitous, where by intelligence I simply mean that they can send out those radio signals.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of dinosaurs ruling Earth for a long time.
Yes.
It was some happenstance meteor that seemed to have changed the course of biological history.
Yes.
What if that's a very rare event?
I think there are probably various thresholds that a life form passes through, and producing, well, in our case, the eukaryotic cell was a kind of threshold, and then maybe language might be another
Right.
threshold. Radio technology, which is capable of deploying the rather large amounts of energy it'd be needed to reach us. I mean, obviously, we're talking about great distances here, and so it could be that life itself is common enough, but that life that's capable of generating something that we can detect.
Yes.
It may be extremely rare.
Yeah, it could conceivably be unique.
It could be unique.
Right.
Even life itself could be unique. I mean, we don't know that, and that has the interesting corollary, since the number of planets in the universe is so enormous. If you want to believe, if anybody here wants to believe that life on this planet is unique, then you're immediately committed to the view that the origin of life on this planet was a staggeringly rare event.
Yeah.
So rare that you'd be totally wasting your time trying to work out what happened, because what we're looking for is not a plausible theory. We're looking for an almost unbelievably implausible theory, because if it were plausible, the universe would be crawling with life.
But we can find implausible theories with great plausibility. I mean, there are physical theories that are highly, highly tuned, therefore very implausible, but on paper we can write them down willy-nilly.
Yeah.
So because what you said suggested, if we find the explanation for life, that means it's likely to be a commonplace occurrence because the explanation was so straightforward.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's convincing, because we're pretty good at finding rare explanations.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Can you speak to why there are no high-profile female atheists? Why is it sort of a white man's club?
Well, I don't know that it is. I certainly don't think it should be. No, I mean, I don't have any explanation for that, and I hope it's not true.
Are you going to look for an explanation, or is that kind of a question that just sort of?
I don't think there's any difference in the sexes that matters in this respect.
Brian, Big Bang, Big Crunch, Big Bounce, or infinitely old universe? Richard, to what extent does the notion of the Big Bang rest on mankind's need to know how it all started? Must there be a moment of creation? For me, yes on Big Bang, probably no on Big Crunch. Big Bounce seems pretty damn unlikely, and infinitely old, not in this universe. Richard, you.
What was my question? What was my question?
Your
again?
question was, to what extent does the notion of the Big Bang rest on mankind's need to know how it all started? Must there be a moment of creation?
Must there be a moment of creation? Well, no, because the steady state theory, which is now unfashionable, postulated no moment of creation. The universe was with us forever, and matter was created in the interstices between galaxies. So, as it happens, physics doesn't support that nowadays. So, the Big Bang rests on physical evidence, not on man's need for anything.
Which do you believe will have the greatest, most transformative impact in the next 50 years? Genomics, AI, or robotics?
I take it AI means artificial intelligence, not artificial insemination. Is that? Well, I come from a farming family, you understand. I think they kind of go together because genomics is advancing at a great speed because of Moore's law, which is the empirical law, which I don't think anybody's ever fully explained, that computer power measured in various ways increases at a pretty fixed exponential rate. I don't think anybody knows quite why that is, but it's been true for a long time now. And genomics is so computer dependent that it also advances at an exponential rate, and this you can actually demonstrate by looking at either the dollar cost of sequencing a genome or the time it takes to sequence a genome. It also seems to be exponential over the time that genomes have been sequenced.
Right. What do you think of the recent-ish discoveries that one person may hold multiple copies of genes? Does that affect the current model of natural selection?
I don't see why that would affect the current model of natural selection. It complicates the genomics, but the model of natural selection, which says that natural selection is the differential survival of genes in gene pools, it doesn't matter if they're multiple copies, it still works.
So back to just a couple of questions that I have as we reach the end of the time here. At the end of the book, you began to muse, and you describe how, if you don't mind me quoting for just a moment, as a man looks back on his life so far, how much of what he has achieved or failed to achieve could have been predicted from his childhood, you write? How much can be attributed to measurable quantities, to the interest and pastime of his parents, to his genes, to his happening to meet a particularly influential teacher or happening to go to summer camp? Why do those questions matter to you?
I'm intrigued by the extraordinary luck of the happenstance that gives rise to each one of us and to really everything in the world. I've dramatized this by saying, what if a particular dinosaur had sneezed at a particular moment and thereby changed whether or not it caught? You know, if it hadn't sneezed, it was just about to eat a little shrew-like animal, which was to be the ancestor of all the mammals. There was such an animal. There was one individual shrew-like mammal, which was the ancestor of all modern mammals. This dinosaur was about to eat it when it sneezed, and so the little shrew-like animal got away. So not only our lives, but the existence of all the mammals hangs on that sneeze. Now, of course, I don't know that that particular story is true, but I'm absolutely sure that some similar story is true. Not just one such story, but many, many stories. All of us owe our existence to the happenstance of one particular sperm hitting one particular egg at a particular day. Not only in our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, our great-grandparents' generation. Aldous Huxley said, 1,000,000 spermatozoa all of them alive. Out of their cataclysm, but one poor Noah dare hope to survive. And of that billion minus one might have chanced to be Shakespeare, another Newton, a new Donne. But the one was me. Shame to have ousted your betters thus, taking ark while the others remained outside. Better for all of us, froward homunculus, if you'd quietly died. We all of us are incredibly lucky to be here. And once you've been born, once you've been conceived indeed, then the probability that you're going to go on becomes much, much higher, of course. I mean, before you were conceived, the chance of your existing was all but zero. Once you were conceived, it then becomes kind of measurable. And then other things like you went to a certain school, you met a particular teacher, you went to summer camp. These things also very probably have a dramatic effect upon your subsequent life. But I also speculate that maybe once your life has got going like that, if you go down one particular path, maybe there's a kind of magnetic pull that pulls you back to where you would have been anyway. And I sort of imagine, suppose my parents hadn't returned to England from Africa, and I'd gone on at school in Africa. Would I ever have met Nico Tinberg and joined the Animal Behavior Research Group and written the books that I've written? Would there have been a magnetic pull back to the same pathway, despite the fact that there was this diversion early in life? And this is a question, it's of no great interest for my life, but we can all of us ask that
but it's
question.
Also completely untestable.
Yes, it is almost completely untestable. I mean,
makes one wonder if it is something that, when I read that, I have to say, in your book, I found it an interesting idea, and I sort of knew what you meant, but at the same time I was like, whoa, that's curious that you would invoke this kind of force, this magnetic force, when it kind of can't exist, really.
Well, no, I wouldn't want to. Okay, it's a very strictly a metaphor, but that it could be that
I gather.
Yeah,
the
okay.
metaphor part of it.
It could be, I suppose, that one has certain aptitudes. If say Mozart had not been given music lessons by his father, Mozart's musical genius would probably have pushed him into a musical career anyway. And so that's all that I think I really meant by that.
Yeah.
You can, to some extent, tease out the genetic component by looking at identical twins, because they do have the same genes. And there are a few dozen known cases of identical twins who, for accidental reasons, happen to be reared apart. And so they have been rather intensively studied to see to what extent they do end up doing the same kinds of things.
Right. So we're just about out of time. Just let me mention one quick thing. Richard will be signing copies of his book outside. Due to the volume of people, he's not going to be dedicating, he'll just be signing. But before we actually do wrap it up, you are famous for this wonderful phrase that science is the poetry of reality, right? And in this book, you have a lot of poems and a lot of snippets of songs. It seems like that has sort of been a constant theme throughout your life. And as we just had a brief conversation earlier about this event, we thought it might be interesting to end it a little bit differently, where each of us would kind of pick a poem that we think is kind of relevant to the conversation tonight and just read it to you or describe it. So Richard, do you have...
You go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm happy to do that. So this is a poem that actually I learned about from my sister by chance. It's from a book called Keys to the Door by Robin Robertson. I don't know if anybody know him, but here's how it goes. I loved your age of wonder, your third and fourth and fifth years spent astonished, widening your eyes at each new trick of the world, and me standing there solemnly explaining how it was done, the moon and stars, rainbows, photographs, gravity, the birds in the air, the difference between blood and water. In true life, you would say, looking up, and I would nod, like some broken-hearted sage, knowing there would be no answer soon to all the big questions that were left, to cruelty and fear, to age and grief and death, and no words either, and you like me will sit and shake your head. In true life? Yes, my sweet, strong daughter, I'm afraid there is all this as well, and this is it, true life.
Thank you. I'll try a short poem by W.B. Yeats, who was very much not a scientist. He was a mystic. But this, to me, carries a sort of message of scientific wonder. Be you still, trembling heart. Remember the wisdom out of the old days. Him who trembles before the flame and the flood, and the winds that blow through the starry ways. Let the starry winds and the flame and the flood cover over and hide, for he has no part with the lonely, majestical multitude.
So, please join me in thanking Richard Dawkins, everybody.